Hello folks, thank you for joining me for a new Jiffy Info show. Today I'm going to be comparing the PC copies of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen. Now before I continue, I want to emphasise that this is a comparative video. I believe I'll be misguided in putting both games up for competition, as they both set out to achieve very different experiences. Now my reason behind choosing to compare these titles are that they are both in the same genre, yet they could easily split the target demographic down the middle. This video will not contain spoilers per se, however I will bring up a number of elements from both games that some may consider to be best experienced firsthand. I suspect many of you are watching this curious about the visuals of each game, so I'll get that out of the way first. The Witcher 3 looks outstanding. High resolution textures and great lighting offer some truly incredible scenery. Even after the countless hours I've spent wandering around the game's open world, I still find myself forcing the main protagonist, Geralt, into a slow walk, just so I can soak up my surroundings even more. To be honest, it's amazing how often you'll see scenes like that in this game. My only real gripe is with the large bodies of water, as it somehow possesses some sort of oily texture which isn't really in keeping with the rest of the game's art style. Dragon's Dogma's graphics unfortunately can't receive quite the same praise. Now I don't want you to misinterpret that. I appreciate the initial release was back in 2012, so I'll give it benefit of the doubt. However, when you do compare Dragon's Dogma to games created with more up-to-date technology, it does come up short. That does not stop Dragon's Dogma from occasionally throwing you a curveball, as the game's superb world design easily sets up for some breathtaking views, but more on that a bit later. From a musical standpoint, both games take a very different approach. So yeah, in both cases the music does a great job at setting the stage for the type of adventure you're about to embark upon. Now the world of Witcher is dark and rife with heavy subject matter like racism and murder, and the soundtrack really amplifies that with the war-torn atmosphere by using war drums and adding this air of authenticity. Now where the soundtrack predominantly conveys a grim atmosphere, at times you'll find yourself drawn into this light-hearted or even comical scene, and this is executed just as well through the game's OST. As for Dragon's Dogma, it immediately pulls you into a different direction. Although the game includes some dark themes, it is clear that the focus is immediately set towards portraying you as the hero. In its first 60 seconds of fame, your avatar grabs a sword and gallantly sprints headlong towards a fire-breathing dragon. This, although cliché, matches the soundtrack you'll be hearing throughout your adventure. I can tell you, you'll find it a challenge not to be impressed, when each action sequence really does feel as epic as the last. Musically, the atmosphere during each game's downtime is achieved just as well. Where in Dragon's Dogma you'll be walking the streets of Grand Soren, happily outfitting your character and gathering supplies to light-hearted tunes, in The Witcher you'll be regularly oppressed by sounds of melancholy just around each corner. This brings me to my next point. The world of The Witcher, although grim, doesn't stop the scenery from being beautiful. Not only do you have the huge and gorgeous open world to explore, it's filled with plenty of diversity to avoid repetition. From dank dungeons to snow-capped mountains, it's all crafted meticulously. Now Dragon's Dogma may not have the same map diversity as The Witcher 3, however I must admit it still has one of my favourite map designs in an open world role-playing game to date. Where many game developers focus on creating a large map dotted with loads of points of interest, the team at Capcom created this unique blend between this and linear action-adventure level design. The best way for me to describe this is by referring to the game Shadow of the Colossus. Imagine a world like Shadow of the Colossus with a sprawling landscape. Now, within the map there are multiple locations that funnel you through to where Colossus resides. In my mind, it's as if Capcom adopted this design, created a slightly more compact version, and then populated the world with enemies. Now this way you're still offered the open world exploration, but the funneling by way of cliff faces or coastal paths, it now allows for more creative action set pieces. Not to mention the clever geographical positioning, often creating this big reveal to some extremely memorable viewpoints. The regularity of confronting enemies in Dragon's Dogma would be excessive if it weren't for the fantastic combat design. In fact, I go as far as saying that Dragon's Dogma offers some of the best combat I've ever played in a game. I can't tell you how sick and tired I'm getting of game developers conforming to this counter-attack strategy coined by Ubisoft back in the first days of Assassin's Creed. I'm not claiming that the combat style isn't enjoyable, however with so many titles using this system it's quickly become oversaturated. Now I'll tell you now, I'm a firm believer in offense is the best offense. This may not be the best approach in reality, but I'm not referring to reality, I'm referring to a fucking video game. Waiting for AI to kick in and start attacking, only for me to press one button to do a counter and for my character to play out its animation to get a kill, isn't engaging enough. Several buttons are mapped for the combat in Dragon's Dogma, each of which have an alternative attack, and a few of which can contain multiple iterations of that attack. I often hear the argument, RPGs, like Elder Scrolls, don't have a great combat system, but that's fine, because the story is what's important. I always found myself as someone who subscribed to that argument and used it as a justified reason. However, Dragon's Dogma is actually a testament to the contrary. The combat is deep, engaging, and on top of all that, it still produces a fantastic story. The Witcher 3's combat system appears more commonly up for debate. I personally really like it. There is an obvious learning curve and it does involve timing and strategy, and there's enough variation within the skill trees so it's easy for a slightly different approach on the second or even third playthrough. It's also worth mentioning here that the variety of enemy types lends itself to diverse combat. Both games have large scale beasts, and where Dragon's Dogma utilises the class system to offer multiple ways to bring down foes, The Witcher allows a far more methodical approach. You can brew potions and oils for various different buffs, and you can even dive into books to research your enemy prior to an encounter. Choosing in fact not to implement that practice can easily cause some large difficulty spikes. As I said, there is a learning curve when it comes to playing The Witcher. There isn't a simple hack and slash method. Choosing to play The Witcher on a lower difficulty preset is obviously an option, but allowing yourself a challenge can easily give you that higher sense of accomplishment. In brief, playing as Geralt means you are stepping into the weather boots of a legend, a premise that is far from understated, and is emphasised still if you've actually played the previous Witcher installments. The game does a wonderful job at making you feel responsible for that status. If you're just faffing about, only to bite the dust against a couple of harpies, you're going to feel pretty daft. Especially when you consider the fact that your character has built this reputation by slaying archgriffins in his spare time. This therefore encourages you to follow some of the game's most in-depth systems like brewing potions. The sense of accomplishment comes from perfectly executing a well-devised plan. After all, being a Witcher doesn't make monster hunting merely a job, it's a profession. Dragon's Dogma also has the in-depth crafting and alchemy system as you'd expect, which, although I consider to be more of an optional element, you can easily find the benefits of preparing before you depart on an adventure. In fact, both Dragon's Dogma and The Witcher encourage you to explore these systems early on, as you may stumble across any high-level enemy without warning, as the game's world doesn't actually scale to your character's level. This is a welcome change of pace, as you can find yourself against some real challenges early on, once again opening up the opportunity for a huge sense of accomplishment. So far I've been talking about the many great elements of both titles. Like all things in life, there is always room for improvement. The praise I have given The Witcher 3's difficulty is well placed, however I would be remiss if I did not mention not only its plateau in difficulty, but its substantial dip. Traditional games would challenge you more and more as you progress, taking into consideration your developed understanding of the game's mechanics and cognitive skills on the controller. These days, however, more and more games seem to be changing things to make it easier as you progress. The Witcher 3 is a prime example. After the midway point, you begin to slay all kinds of enemies with ease. You can counteract this by upping the difficulty preset, however I don't see this as a viable excuse, especially if you're already at the maximum difficulty, as this leaves you no other option other than to seek out higher level quests for a challenge. On a number of occasions, bugs and glitches would rear their head. Although not game breaking, they are definitely immersion breaking, even if they can still provide a bit of amusement. Additionally, although the game does do a very good job at introducing you to the universe of The Witcher, you will very likely find yourself lost during a few quest lines. Seeing as there is a heavy theme of politics in this game and previous installments, there are multiple occasions where the conversation can lose you due to the relevance of events that took place in The Witcher 1 or 2. Seeing as this is The Witcher 3, however, one would assume that you have prepared for this eventuality. In all honesty, there is not much else to be said about The Witcher 3's imperfections, and those that I have mentioned can easily be looked past. With that in mind, I won't go hunting for any flaws any further, as the chance of me finding anything would likely just result in me being over pedantic. It's sad to say that the flaws in Dragon's Dogma are far more apparent. You will establish this fairly early on with the voice acting, which leaves a lot to be desired, but where it really comes up short is the lip syncing and choice of cutscenes. During dialogue situations, the camera is thrust in front of the NPC almost in a Fallout or Elder Scrolls fashion. This, albeit unimaginative, serves its purpose. However, the awful lip syncing is now perfectly centered for us to endure. Regarding the cutscenes, let me use an example. I was tasked with tailing an NPC around the streets of the game's main city, Grand Soren. The gameplay is interrupted on several occasions just so the game could show me where the target has gone. This is insulting to the player. It's a menial task. I'm not an idiot. But that's not the point here. When I had eventually followed my target to its destination, it was required that I eavesdrop. The game then proceeds to snatch the perspective away from my character, forcing me into a cutscene, allowing a fantastic view, once again, of the lackluster facial animations. Lip syncing aside, why are we pushed into a cutscene in the first place? The element of eavesdropping is a surefire way to build tension. Why not let us climb onto the roof to get a vantage point so we can see or hear the events unfold? The same thing applies here.
The beasts are bled and the whole retaken! Victory is ours! Victory! Victory is ours!
Why not just let us stand amongst the cheering NPCs? It would feel far more visceral. Just to be clear, I don't have a problem with the cutscenes themselves. Although they are nothing to write home about, they still provide a basis to be used for narrative purposes. My problem with the two I've highlighted, and others I'm choosing to ignore, is that they are completely unnecessary, and I believe that the game would benefit without them. I also want to address the problem with being dubbed Arisen so early on into the game. The game opens with a well-constructed tutorial, it's exciting and it's action-packed. Once you've progressed into the main game, you are thrust into a second action sequence where a dragon kicks your ass, organ thievery takes place, and from there on out, you are viewed as the Arisen, something that's regarded as an immense title. This, although a fantastic opening, is why I have some issues with the game. Establishing yourself as the Arisen so early on means that any tasks you want to attend to around your hometown can seem a bit redundant. I imagine the developers wanted to have this action-packed introduction to the game, highlighting the combat system right from the get-go. But they managed to achieve this in the prologue. There was no shock factor synonymous with having your ass handed to you by the dragon. The delivery just feels weak. Personally, I would have preferred to have seen my character have a slightly slower development, allowing him to become someone people considered to be a formidable fighter over time. Once the spec had eventually been established over a few hours into the game, they could introduce the story arc of being the Arisen. At this point, losing to the dragon would have had far more impact. I mean, picture this. You have created a name for yourself through killing fierce enemies across the land when a dragon appears. You then charge in a similar fashion to the way you did in the current version. However, in this version, you have plenty of confidence behind you. When the dragon then in turn beats you, it's only then that it transpires that you are the Arisen. By delivering this revelation later on into the game, it allows for a few things. 1. Your errands and simple side quests early on feel a bit more justified. And 2. What you consider to be a fierce warrior is no match for a dragon, ultimately creating an even bigger incentive to exact your revenge. Alas, the layout of the game's narrative is still excellent. I just feel my version may have been a little bit more impactful. The Witcher 3, as previously mentioned, has a well-structured story-driven narrative, which in itself is impressive. It excels further, however, as the decisions you make throughout the lengthy adventure impact the world around you in a variety of different ways. The beauty of this system is that it does not slap you in the face with knowledge of the fact there was a dynamic event taking place. While solving a murder during a side quest, I came to my conclusion as to who I believed would be the culprit. Now this was based on evidence such as calling cards and false alibis. I killed the suspect, completed the quest, and moved on to other pressing matters. Some hours later I returned to that city in which the murders took place, and while walking around the cobbled streets I stumbled across a corpse on the ground. So I approached it, and I found a calling card. It turns out the killer was still at large. This is quite frankly a tiny event that took place that made the world feel far more believable immediately. For some perspective, other decisions I have made in the game have caused enormous cities to actually shift the dynamic drastically. It goes without saying that this offers tons of replay value. Dragon's Dogma has introduced a minion system. These player-created minions, or pawns as they're called, can be employed to aid you in your adventure. The system is incredibly deep, and if I was to explain this and talk about all the other numerous USPs that Dragon's Dogma possesses, we'll be here all day. With that in mind, I'm instead just going to rattle off a bunch. I should give you a good idea of what the game attempts and for the most part succeeds in introducing innovative ideas. The combat system is flushed out and brilliantly executed. Up to 9 well-balanced classes offer further diversity within combat. The story is original and unafraid of taking risks. The day and night cycle doesn't just change the visuals, but it actually opens up different gameplay mechanics. An open world that builds exploration and linearity as one. It's a creative way to be involved in the online community, yet not be hindered by connection problems. So there you have it, a comparison between The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen. Although it's not the most comprehensive comparison, it should give you a good idea of what both games have to offer. Now if you're on the fence about which title to pick up, and this video served as a definitive shove over to either side of that fence, I can tell you right now that was not my intention. If anything, my intention was to encourage you to try both, as I truly believe that both games can deliver some extremely memorable experiences. Now if you've made it all the way to this point in the video, I should say thank you very much for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Please leave a comment, consider subscribing, and yeah, thanks again, and I'll catch you folks another time.